Hello. Today is Monday, June 21st, 2015, and the United States Supreme Court this morning finished releasing several decisions of cases that have been pending this term. The court's term runs each year from October until the end of June. So this time of year is always when you see a lot of big decisions come down from the U.S. Supreme Court. And there are two decisions that everyone is paying a lot of attention to, and the news media has spent a lot of time talking about. The first is the marriage equality cases, or the same-sex marriage cases. These are basically two cases that came to the High Court when one of the circuit courts, the lower appellate courts, actually ruled in favor of keeping a state's ban on same-sex marriage, where the other circuit courts had ruled uniformly in striking the ban. So once you have a conflict amongst the lower circuit courts, a lot of times that's what will cause the United States Supreme Court to take a case, because not very many cases have a right to be heard by the United States Supreme Court. Generally, the U.S. Supreme Court gets to choose what cases it will hear. But certainly the same-sex marriage case, which is known as Obergefell v. Hodges, will be released in the next few days. The other case that garners a great deal of media attention is a case dealing with the Affordable Care Act, commonly referred to as Obamacare. Everyone knows that the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act. But this particular case, and it's known as King versus Burwell, this case deals with part of the Affordable Care Act that gives subsidies or gives tax credits through the Internal Revenue Service to individuals who qualify. But the way the statute, the Affordable Care Act, was written, it talks about each state having an exchange. And that is where the insurance companies can basically sell their insurance policies in a particular state, and how the government assesses whether an individual qualifies for subsidies for these qualifying insurance policies. That's an oversimplification, but hopefully gives you a little bit of context of where this case is going, because the challengers in the Burwell case are saying that they received the subsidies, but that they shouldn't receive them because they live in states that refused to set up their own insurance exchange. And under the Affordable Care Act, if a state refused to set up its own exchange, the federal government could come in and administer and create an exchange for that state. Alabama is one of those states that our state government refused to set up its own exchange and set its own rules, and left it to the federal government to do. Well, the challengers in Burwell are seeking a decision from the U.S. Supreme Court that would strike down the ability of the federal government to give subsidies to those people who qualify to help pay for their insurance under the Affordable Care Act. It's important to remember there is no new government insurance out there. The term Obamacare doesn't mean anything like Medicare or Medicaid. Most of the people who qualify under what is known as Obamacare in Alabama are purchasing a policy from mainly Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Alabama. There are some other insurers that participate in Alabama's exchange, but Blue Cross and Blue Shield dominates the insurance market in Alabama. So, if the Supreme Court does strike down this provision, then millions of people in Alabama and states all across the country whose governors or state legislatures refused to set up their own exchange and let the federal government do it, if the challengers are successful, they could immediately lose their subsidies. While that wouldn't be the end of the Affordable Care Act, it would cause such chaos in the country and such economic hardship for people that are depending upon those subsidies for their insurance that it might cause Congress to do something, but what that would be, no one is quite sure of. So that's why the Burwell case gets a lot of attention. The marriage equality cases, again, Obergefell versus Hodges is the name that will be assigned to it. That one's a lot more simple to understand, that the court is being asked, is there a constitutional right for people to be married? And specifically, is there a constitutional right for people of the same sex to be married? The main question before the court, if the court finds that there is a constitutional right under the Equal Protection Clause, the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, then every state that has a ban, including Alabama, on same-sex marriage, those bans would be nullities and would be void. And we already have lower court rulings striking down the ban in Alabama and other states, but if the U.S. Supreme Court rules, then that will be it. And if it holds that there is that constitutional right, same-sex marriage will be legal everywhere in this country and will be legal almost immediately. There are a lot of nuts and bolts type things that states would have to figure out about the license themselves, but that would basically be it. The court could also go a different way and say that they're not going to mandate that there is an absolute constitutional right to marriage, or specifically to same-sex marriage, but that states are free to decide. And if one state, for example, California or Iowa or Connecticut, where same-sex marriage is already legal, if those states recognize it and people who are married in those states move to a state that doesn't grant license to same-sex couples, like Alabama, then Alabama would still have to recognize that marriage as valid, and those individuals would have the same rights in Alabama if they moved here that they would if they were back in California or Iowa or Connecticut. A lot of legal observers do not believe that the court will act in that regard because it kind of creates a confusing situation, and if you're going to say that these rights carry from state to state and the states would have to recognize the marriage, they just wouldn't have to issue license to their own citizens to get married. But if somebody crosses the state line and goes to a state that does recognize it and comes back, then Alabama has to recognize it. So a lot of people don't believe the court will kind of split the difference and go that route, that they will rule whether or not there's a fundamental right. Certainly, the court could rule that there is not, and that the bans are upheld, and that there's no right to same-sex marriage. And you will have, again, a number of states where it is legal, and a number of states like Alabama where it would not be. But if they don't address that fundamental question, there are going to be lots of questions left to be answered in the states. So it's getting a lot of attention. And we know, or at least we're 99% sure, that the court will make a decision one way or the other by the end of June. Now, the Supreme Court releases decisions usually every Monday, and they've released decisions this Monday. There is one more Monday left in the month, and that is Monday, June 29th. The court may well issue the Burwell and the Obergefell decisions on the same day, or they may not. The court announced today, which is the 22nd of June, that they will release additional opinions this Thursday. So they will release some opinions. Again, there's 7 cases left to be decided that have already been argued this term, and they will release some decisions on this Thursday, and then certainly again on Monday. They could possibly have further opinions on maybe Tuesday of next week, but most people believe Monday will be the last day. Cable news networks, online news sites will have a lot to say about these cases. A lot of what will be said in the coming days, no matter how the ruling comes out, will be either overly simplistic, partisan, slanted one way or the other, or just downright wrong and incorrect. Because most people that will be reporting or writing about this aren't lawyers. They're not judges. They don't understand the complexities in some of these legal questions, and sometimes they just don't understand the law. I'm not trying to throw stones at journalists, but that's just a fact. It would be as if I was doing a blog about medical procedures and I had no background in medicine at all. It would be very difficult to speak intelligently about that. A lot of so-called experts, people that are lawyers or judges, will be on television and will be saying a lot of different things. Some of it may be good, some of it may be incorrect, some of it may just be partisan. If you are interested in decisions of the United States Supreme Court, or you're just interested in these or one of these two big decisions that are upcoming, I would encourage you to visit a site called SCOTUSblog.com. That is SCOTUSblog.com. SCOTUSblog.com is the absolute quickest way you will find a decision of the United States Supreme Court on the day it is released. They will have a live blog every day that opinions are issued by the High Court. It is absolutely nonpartisan. It does not have any type of bias that I have been able to discern. I've never even really seen it accused of being biased one way or the other. The only bias might be that it is entirely focused on the law. It's not focused on the politics or the media sideshows that may accompany some of these cases, but it will tell you exactly what happens as it happens. And for the non-lawyers, there is an article written about most of the large decisions shortly after it's been issued, called In Plain English, that will explain the reasoning of the court in its ruling, but do it in a way that a non-lawyer could easily understand it. I would encourage anyone to go visit SCOTUSblog.com, and SCOTUS just is the acronym for Supreme Court of the United States. They do some great work, and I'll be watching it this Thursday and next Monday, with probably about close to 500,000 to 1 million others that will be watching it, because that is the best source. The way the court works, there are no cameras allowed in the courtroom. There's no live reporting from inside the courtroom. It's a very traditional approach in how the opinions are released, and that they're released in writing, and the justices read a summary of them in the court. So the best and quickest way to find out is to go to SCOTUSblog.com and check that out. So I hope this was somewhat informative to you about some decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court that are upcoming. And after those decisions are reached, we will probably have a blog post on here talking about their effects in Alabama. On the Burwell decision, we represent a lot of individuals and employers that will be interested in that decision, and certainly the marriage equality case is going to be of great interest to probably everybody in the entire country. So until then, thanks for watching.